Good afternoon, guys. Thank you for joining the class again. It makes me really happy that you are here and you are eager just to comprehend what's being taught here. So let's continue with what we had last time. And I made some modifications yesterday because when I tried to create the whole thing, then I realized a few things had to be modified. So let's get to the database first. And I want to show you what I changed here. So I realized yesterday that when we use the different elements of the database in our code, it's a problem that it includes capital letters. That's why the first change I made here with the database table name. It was earlier website data, and I changed it to website. And it's very important that it starts with a lowercase letter, with the lowercase w. That's my first modification. The second one, which is important to mention, is that I had to add another column, which is the ID column. So it's not enough if we have only the name, the address, and the email, but it must include an ID as well. So how did I do that? Basically very important and very easy, this one. So if you click on the website and you right click and you check properties and you go on columns, then you see that this table includes 4 different columns at the moment. I changed the name, the address, and the email to lowercase, right? It was earlier uppercase and we don't want that. The type is the same and the ID is new. So the data type for the ID is big int, right? And this is a not null value, so the not null should be yes, because this ID must include a value, and that value must be unique, so it cannot be the same for 2 different rows. And the primary key, yes, this is gonna be a primary key. So when we talk about a relational database and database table, we need to understand that when we put data in the table, there should be a primary key, because when we use any SQL script, this is regarded, so that's why I set it to yes, because it's important. So how did I create this new column? It's quite easy. So when we close this and we go on columns and you right click and you say create column, and that's where you can create a new column. You just write the name here and comment, and then here definition, the data type you must fill out, and also the not null value should be yes, right? And the variables, security, and SQL, I didn't touch those. So okay, that's how I added the new column, ID column, and how I changed the uppercase letters to lowercase. When you go to the name, then basically you right click and you say properties, and then here is where you can change the lowercase letter to uppercase or reversed. Okay, so that was my modification regarding the database. And of course we had to change the code which we created last time. We created the user Java file, which is the models, right? Let's get into that. And what needs to be done here is we change the table name. It's website now with lowercase w, and the ID here should be lowercase, and also all the other ones like the name, address, and email, they all need to be lowercase, right? Yeah, that's what I changed. And when we scroll down, we can see here we need to change also to lowercase, because we have to match with these values. The name should be exactly the same like here, and the address should be the same like here, and the email also should be the same like here, right? That's what I adjusted. Here the capital letters can stay because these are only parameters, so we just pass in these parameters, and the values here will pick up the parameter value. All right. And of course, here when we create the getters and setters, here they should be lowercase as well, right? It's the same with the name and also with the address and also with the email. So that's what I changed. So please do that as well. In the hierarchy of the different folders, you remember last time this models folder we had in the example folder inside. That was also not good because yesterday when I tested, it gave me an error that the Spring Boot application will recognize actually the controller if it's in the demo folder, because these folders, the controllers, models, repositories, services should be in the same folder where the main application is in the demo application Java, unless you specify the route correctly in the relevant files. I didn't have to specify anything because if I put these folders under the demo, the Spring Boot application will know where to find these files. That's why this alignment was necessary, it was important. Okay, so the next step is if we get back to our um, drawing, last time we saw that the entities between the database and the repository interface somewhere here, right? Today, we are going to create the repository interface, the repository itself, and the service, and also the controller. So let's start with the repository. So getting back to the code, under the repository subfolder, which you created on the demo by right-click and new, and then folder. That's how you could create it. Inside the repositories folder, you need to right-click again, you go on new, and you choose file. And when you choose file, here you write the file name. The file name is user-repo.java, and you click finish, and the Java file is created. Okay, now you name the package. The package follows the file structure because you see this is the com folder, the example and demo folders, and finally the repositories. So it only follows, you know, the structure, the folder structure. We need to import different Java elements, Java objects, which were created before standard Java classes. We didn't create them. They were created by others, and then we just import them, right? So make sure that these files are imported into your file, right? Also the CRUD repository and the repository and the models users. This is an internal class we have to import. All the other ones, these are external ones. Other people created those. We only created this, but in order for us to be able to use this here in this file, in the user repo file, we need to import it. And then we have to use an annotation which is called repository, right? That's how we mark this file as a repository file, because actually this is a Java file, but this should be marked, this repository, with this annotation. So it's not a class, you know, it's an interface. You have to look up on the internet what's the difference between an interface and a class. And you'll see this is just an interface, which we call user repo. That's the name. And this will extend the CRUD repository. In the CRUD repository, we use two parameters, the user, which we imported here. So we will pass in the user as a parameter and the long value, which is a Java value. That's the condition how to call this CRUD repository, how to put this CRUD repository here with these parameters. So when we see this extends, it means this is the parent and this is the child. So that means the user repo will inherit the CRUD repository's functions, can use that. And when we state here, this list, which is type of user, we'll use this function, the find all. What does that mean? The find all means, remember, here we have the database, right? Here we have only one record. Well, if we had, let's say, 5, 10, or 15 different records under one another, then with this code, with the find all function, we will collect all the records from the database table into this user repo repository. So this will sum up and collect the records from the database. That's why we need the repository. These 3 lines are comments. They are not regarded when we use the Java compiler just to compile our code. I can write anything here. This is not important because these 2 slashes mean that this is only a comment. So it's not a code which should be regarded here, right? But later on we'll do some modification, but not now. So that's enough. From here till here, it's gonna be regarded and compiled. This one will not be. Okay, so the user repo is done. So the next step, let's jump here, is the service, right? So get onto the service folder and right click and create a new file. You can call it user service Java file. You'll put it into the package. This is the package name, and you need to import this list, right? Well, here we have some more imports. As you see, these are all important to import here so that we can use the different functions. So make sure that these ones are imported into your class file. Right. So the next step, when we create the class, the Java class, we can call it user service. And we need to use an annotation again, which is the service annotation. This is going to be a backend service. On the front-end side, we'll have a separate front-end service as well, but this is a backend service. Okay, the next step is we create a variable. This variable is a user, it's a user repository variable. That's the name of the variable, and that's the type of the variable. So it's a user repo, which we created here before. That's the type, and it's private, which means this can be accessible only from this class. And here you see a constructor. The constructor is used this way. We take the user service name, it's always the name of the class, and parentheses, and in the parentheses we put the parameter. This is the parameter, and this is the type of the parameter. But since we want to use this here with the constructor, we have to use a dependency injection. So it means the user service is dependent on the user repository. So with this annotation, we make sure that this dependency injection is successful. So once we create the user service class, it's going to be dependent on the user repository. And this variable, the user repository variable, will pick up the user repository parameter. So the value here in the parameter will be picked up by the user repository variable, right? That's also very important. And then the next one is that we are going to create a function which is called find by all. It has no parameters, but the return value will be a list of users. That's the return value of this function. And also the public access modifier means it can be accessible from anywhere in this code. And then the next step is we create a variable. It's called users. This is type of user list. So it's a list consisting of different users. That's the type. And here with this new and array list, here is when an instance of this user list will be created. So the users variable will pick up the type user list. So we created a new variable the users variable. So actually that's how we create the new users variable. And then the next one is that the user repository find all function will be called. Don't forget that in the user repo, we have the find all function. This function will be called from the other file, from the user service file right here. How? We need to use the user repository instance, and then we can call the find all function. And since this might include more records, because don't forget, here we can have 10, 15, 20 different records, then this will include more records. So we have to iterate through all these records one by one. So the way we do that is with a for each cycle. It will iterate through the whole thing and one by one, and we'll add every element to the users list, which was empty here. It's still empty here. So when it goes through the user repository, the elements of the user repository will be added to the user's variable, and then it will return the user. So when I call the find by all, basically it will return the users. All right, so that's how we did that. The rest is not important because this is just garbage. It's only comment. How we know it's comment. This one, the slash and the star slash between these two, this is only comment. It's not interpreted by the compiler. I can write anything here. All right, the most important is this one. This is gonna be compiled. Okay, once this is done, what's the next step? Let's see that. So the next step is here to create the controller, right? The controller is here in the controllers folder. So what needs to be done is we create the package, and then we import this Java util list. This is only a comment. We don't need that, so it's only because of these two slashes, this is a comment. It's not interpreted. But this one below, it's important because when we create the user class, the user controller class, we have to annotate that with a REST controller. That's how we refer to this class as a REST controller. Don't forget, here we already discussed that, not here, sorry, in the other. So we already discussed the front end always communicates with the controller, right? So how does the front end know that where is the controller, which one is the controller? Here, this annotation tells it, right? So, okay, I need to write the REST controller because it's gonna be a REST controller. Then I create a variable, which is the user service variable. That's the name of the variable. That's the type of the variable. And this is private. It's an access modifier, meaning this can be accessed only from this class. And then when I refer to the constructor, because it's a user controller, I use a constructor, I have to inject the user service as a dependency into that. How do I do that? As you saw earlier, we use the auto-wired annotation, and we use the parameter here, which is the user service parameter. That's how we can use a dependency injection, meaning that the user controller class is dependent on the user service. And the user service variable, this one, will pick up the parameter we'll pass in here later on. Okay, this is just a comment as yesterday I just tried a few stuffs here, so it's not important because it's commented out with that. But what's important is right here, this one, is the next step is I will create the endpoint. That is the endpoint, this one here. That's what we call an endpoint. Remember, here we had a drawing, and in the drawing, I marked this as an endpoint. This is where the front end sends its request. And this is where from the request goes to the front end. So basically, this is part of the backend. So it's not a separate unit, only in our drawing, but basically that's what we call an endpoint. And this endpoint is a function. Get all users. I just created sorry, I would put in another phrase. This endpoint is not a function. This is the endpoint, and whatever will be sent to this endpoint, this function will be called. That's the correct phrase, right? So I will create this function, and the return value of this function is a list of users. And I will put this here, throws exception. What if, for example, if the database is closed, it's not open, then I need to get an error. And if I put this here, this error will be handled. So that's why it needs to be here. And then I create the users variable as a list type, a list of users type. So this will include only users. And I will say the users will be equal to the user service find by all function, which will return all the users from the repository. That's how I call the function from another Java class. And this variable will be pick up the return value of this function. And with this, I just write this users variable onto the console. That's only for the programmer. So the programmer sees is there any value there or not. And the return type is user, so it will return all the users. So, and now the whole process is complete because we created the repository, we created the service, and now the controller. Okay, so this one here is again, this is only a comment, so it's not important, it will not be interpreted, not compiled. So I just wanted to do here something, but we'll continue later with that. It's not important now. Okay, so now how can we test if it's working or not? Very easy. Actually, I need to find my project, my Java project. Where is that? So I will go to that folder where my Java project is. Actually, it's here. This is the path. So I will open up a CMD, a command line, and go exactly to the same folder like here. So it's the documents, admin, Spring Boot sample, demo2, and demo. If I type in clear screen, the screen is clear now, and I want to know what's inside. So I click on dir, I just type in dir, and I see this is the content of this directory. All right, here's the POM file. That's the most important because we have to be in that directory where the POM file is. And now I have to type in a Maven command. Sorry, I forgot two important things before we do that. We need to get back to the code. I need to explain, and then we can do this command. Let's get back here. So we have two more files to touch. So these were, the three additional files, but I forgot this application.properties file. Here in the application.properties file, actually, I am using, these different data here. This is not my code. Actually, this type of code I already copied from another code. So it's just a, kind of copy. So we don't have to write from scratch. So you can copy the way it is. Then this one, you can use, for your own program. How? You have to modify this actually. So the way you modify that is basically that you have to change this one because it depends on how you code your database. This is the name of the database. So if you come back here and you see here how you called your database, it is right here. That's what I called it. So that's the name we have to pass in there. Okay. So that's the website data. This one, since it's running on our local machine, this should be exactly the same like here. Okay. So the next step is that you use the username you gave when you created the database, your password. This is just a general password I gave here. So I use that one. And this is the driver. You can use it the same way like here. You just have to change it to yours, these two things. And then this can be here like the same, you know, and this is the website schema. So you have to give this schema name, right? So when you come back here, let me check again. So website schema, here's the schema name. That's what you have to use there, right? So use the schema name here. And then this can be exactly the same like in my code. So just, you know, type it in here and that's gonna be all right. Okay, so once you are done with the application properties, you connected your code to the database. That's how the database will recognize your data, and if everything is okay, it will allow you just to enter into the database. What's the next step? You go to the POM file and you have to add some important dependencies. So I will scroll down very slowly. You can stop the video. You can include these dependencies into your code when you practice. So here is the dependency section. So please make sure that you use these dependencies I did use. And basically, after the dependencies are okay, you have put all the dependencies here, then you have to type in the build and also this stuff in the build. Okay, these are the two configuration files. Once you are done, we can come back here where we left off. And then here's the next thing. So we want to test if it's working. So we use a Maven command, which is called Maven clean install, right? So I'm using the Maven clean install. What does this command do? This command will compile our Java project into bytecode, which can be run. So let's hit enter and let's see what's going on, what's happening now. So I am just compiling the whole code now, and you see the build is successful. A build has been created. How do I know it? So if I get back to this folder, and here's the target folder. The target folder is always the folder where the compiled Java files are. And the most important is this jar file, the demo001 snapshot.jar. That's the file where our project is compiled into. So that's going to be deployed onto the server. So the next step is that we will jump over to the target folder. So we change to the target folder and let's see what is in the target folder. You see in the target folder, we filed a compiled Java file, which is this one. So what we do is we will start this Java file, the jar file. It's a runnable jar file. So the way we can do that, we write Java and then jar and the name of the file, which is demo 001 snapshot dot jar, right? And click enter. Okay, now we started our backend this way. So when I check it, it says that the backend has been started. So started the demo application. And then I want to check if it's really started or not. How can I do that? So it's running on a Tomcat server. The port is 8080. So I'll go to the localhost 8080. It will give me an error because nothing is there, but we have to remember that here is our controller where the endpoint is defined. The endpoint is /hello. So what we can do is we put here the /hello, and right here, wow, what happened? Actually, I got back one record from the database on the endpoint because this is our endpoint. The front end will send a request to this endpoint, and the endpoint will return one record exactly the same what we have in our database. Because when you check the database here, right, then you see in the database we have one record, this one, and this is exactly what we see here on the endpoint. The ID, name, address, and email address. So our work was successful because we got back the data from the database. And next time we are going to continue with some more endpoints, and I will show you how to write new records into the database, how to modify, and how to delete records, and then we are done. So basically next time we are going to finish the backend, and after that we can start with the front end, which is very, very exciting, I can tell you. Well, basically, I hope you understood how to get the data from the database right onto the endpoint. So that was the aim of the class today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great weekend, and then see you next weekend. Bye bye.